Today on Geek Shop, we're talking about character development. So, let's take a walk to the Geek Shop. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Geek Shop. Today we are talking about character creation or character development. As always, with me is Chetan. Say hello, Chetan.
Hello.
So I think character development, we're going to start with your characters because my book is a lot newer than your book. And so I just feel like you've got a lot more to say about development and about sort of creating characters because you have so many of them. So I guess with TikTok Tom, since there are so many characters, how many characters did you start with TikTok Tom?
Just one, really.
Okay.
Well, actually, no. Two characters because I published a bunch of college friends. We published a book called Cool Box, and in that one I had a character that appeared, Kaleidoscope Kirk. And then in one of the issues, I put TikTok Tom in it. And then through a couple of friends' advice, we went with TikTok Tom mini comic #1. And in that issue, later on in the stories, I reintroduced Kirk into that storyline.
Okay, that's a character I don't see much now, like in the new stuff, though, right? You sort of taken him out.
I taken him out, and honestly, it's one of those characters I really like drawing and writing with him. But I don't know how to fit them into the storyline.
That is a big part. I mean, that's part of the thing that I think we're going to end up talking about today, is the idea that some characters are really fun to draw, but they're just not good characters from like the storytelling perspective. So, whereas other characters are really interesting in storytelling, but maybe even not much fun to draw.
Well, in the latest story we're working on, I introduced a new character called Puri. She's actually a female version of that character because I didn't want to use him.
Fair enough.
And because it's like a trial and error thing, so let me see how it works. And I was planning to use him in the storyline because our next book is going to be at least 160 pages to 200 pages, and she appears in a lot of the story, a lot of pages. And At first I was thinking of using him, then I just backed out of it.
Yeah, I definitely. I've noticed just with TikTok. Well, the other question actually I had about TikTok Tom characters, because I know you're reusing them, but there's a lot of characters that you didn't actually create as well because it's a group book, correct?
Yes.
So I guess like you have, let's see, there's Stinky, there's Jack, there's Iggy, there's Jean, as we learned to pronounce his name properly. So how many of those characters did you create?
Jean was created by Tom.
Yep.
Iggy was created by me, and actually you helped me ink one of the first Iggy stories when she first appeared, if you remember.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I penciled it in. I think we were at the art store, and I can't remember the full conversation, but you ended up inking that one panel.
Yeah. So wow. I'm a part of TikTok Tom history. This is awesome.
That's it, yes. And Tom and Jack were created a long time ago. And Jack, actually, I created in the around early 90s, but never used him in any story until the full-size book.
So where do you get your inspiration for your characters?
To be honest, I know it's going to sound weird, but I don't know. It just, you know what? Just come up with an idea and just create them. And I remember one of the writers, Peter Milligan, which I admire a lot. In an interview, they asked him a question about his characters and how he writes his characters, and he said, "I just come up with a character, and as the issues go along, it seems like they write themselves."
So that's sort of where I was going to go next in the sort of the TikTok Tom world in particular. When you've created new characters, is it because you needed a character to do something, or do you create the character? Like, is it a tool for the story, or is the character created and then this sort of story follows them? Do you find with yourself?
I think it's the characters created and story follows them, honestly.
Okay.
Because if you look at all of our characters, it just seems like they just fit into the storyline and they do their own thing.
Yeah. So was Jack sort of the first sort of secondary character. It was Jack, right? Jack was the first one, or no?
Yeah,
It was,
Kirk was the first one. Then
okay.
I created Tom. Then in the mini comics, Tom had a girlfriend, but I've never used her again since the mini comics. Then
Okay.
Jack came along, or then
Jack.
Iggy came along. Jack was created. I'll show you. I'll post up a drawing of Jack I did, I think in 1993, 4 or something that I wanted to use in the Tom storyline in the mini comics, and for some reason never used him.
Okay. And then you
And
just
kind
found a
of same
spot
thing
for
with
him later.
Iggy. Yeah, same thing with Iggy. The one page where Tom and his girlfriend are looking at a mini comic Tom created. It has Iggy in it. It's a comic within a comic,
Yeah.
and it has Iggy in it. And honestly, the idea of Iggy was just to have her in the mini comic in the comic. Then I think Paul and Carl decided they want to do a story on. Paul Marhu and Carl Borst wanted to do a story on it and asked me if I could use her. I go, yeah, do a story on it. Then Paul inserted her into one of the covers, and since then, that's when and she really wasn't used until the full size book. Also, I
Okay.
mean, basically, Paul used her in one story, and that was it.
It seems like when you got to the full size book, it became more of an ensemble thing. Like the mini comic was really TikTok Tom forward, whereas when you got to the full size books, you sort of had more characters and more of an ensemble and sort of more in there. That's when the secondary characters seemed to come out a
Oh
lot
yeah,
more.
that's true. But the only thing is, in the full size book, I was the only one to use all those characters in the story. Everyone else had their own characters and their own storyline, and I don't know why I decided to use Jack in that storyline because I was just like, you know what, I needed a new idea and stuff, and I always liked the. I mean, I know you'll go back to the Archie approach. You know, having Archie, Jughead, Veronica, and Betty, and all that stuff. It always worked. You had
Yeah.
the chemistry always worked.
Yeah, ensembles are much easier to write for. Like if you
Yeah.
even look at television shows like Friends and even like The Office and a lot of the popular television shows, they're okay when they start off when they're about one or two characters, but once all of the characters are sort of involved, the story just is so much easier to write because you can go in so many different angles and you can
Oh
do
yeah.
everything like that. So I agree, and I think that's to some degree. I almost think your secondary. Like I know the comic is still called TikTok Tom, but it's almost like it should be called TikTok Tom and his friends.
Well, that's what when we first started doing that Temptation storyline, I started with page 1, and Stinky. I did a drawing of Stinky years ago, and I'll post an image of him in a 10-page comic I did. Never used him, so used him in this storyline. You know, he's looking after a box on a street corner. Read our Temptation storyline, and you understand. And we used him, and Jack approaches, and Jack brings him coffee, starts talking away. Then through, I think, about 20 pages, you know, everything's happening. Jack, Iggy, and everything. And throughout the 20 pages, no TikTok Tom appearance. And so then Tom, Yo, and I were talking because we were drawing the story back and forth. We're going, should we introduce him in a storyline now? And it was just funny. We didn't realize we haven't used him in 20 some odd pages.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you're right. It's like, yeah, it was just all the background characters add more focus on it.
yeah, it's really much like that. So it's where you find like background characters can sometimes turn into main characters. Particularly, the story of TikTok Tom sort of evolves that way quite comfortably. So I feel like one of the great advantages too when you have lots of characters in your case is because you have so many people writing and drawing. So anybody who's like new to TikTok Tom doesn't have to worry about like the main character. Like TikTok Tom is like your Superman, and to some people might be intimidating or untouchable, but they can do like an Iggy story or a Stinky story and know that they're not sort of affecting the main timeline or anything like that. I know that's not an issue with you, but for somebody who's new to it, it might be kind of intimidating to take on the main character on your first story. So the cool thing about having an ensemble is when you have new people working on it, they're more willing to take on the secondary characters.
And that's it. And, one thing is good is because we have so many characters and stuff. And I remember Derek Martin, when he came up and he said he wanted to introduce a new character. And I go, hey, it's your story. You do whatever you want. And that's when he
Yeah.
introduced Molitor. And, the Molitor legend began at that time.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. And Tom had Jean. When did he come in?
That was in Temptation. Same storyline. I think he appeared way before Tom did in the storyline. TikTok Tom did, and he appeared in our Temptation story. Just a quick synopsis. It's a story about a man named Stinky who's guarding a box, protecting the box day and night on a street corner. And this pigeon with a pigeon fedora wearing pigeon appears and starts talking to him. And
Yeah.
one good thing with us is, we could throw in oddball characters, and you know what? And it's funny, it's like how they work. It's like, you know what? The quirkiness works.
Yeah, that is one of the things about TikTok Tom that has an advantage because it is kind of surreal. Is you can just
Yeah.
introduce something that's like totally off the wall. Like you could have, you know, whatever. Like literally, like you could have a brick talking to somebody and nobody would bat an eye at it.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be totally acceptable. So it's definitely one of the advantages. And I think Tom introducing a pigeon that's a main character is definitely a step in that direction and in the right direction with that. I think it really worked.
And the good thing of what our book is, and just any book is, you know what? Maybe, we're just too relaxed and easygoing where we're just like, hey, we're going to introduce a pigeon or a space pirate, or space whales, anything. It just,
Yeah.
we're willing, and this is maybe the bad editorialship on my end. I never say no.
It's true. You do never say no. If you ever do something for Chetan, probably the most frustrating thing about Chetan is you'll hand something in that's completely off the wall and wacky, and he's like, "Oh no, it's good," and you're like,
Yeah.
"Really? This is good? Okay." So
Yeah, because you know what? It's fun because you know what? Why? And this is going back to Marvel and DC. Why do the formula stories? Why do the formula? You have to write it this way, and Superman has to be this way, and his hair has to be like this, all that. It's just, what? Too much limitations. You know what?
Yeah.
Just do what you want, and if it works, and you know what? Some stories, and I'll be honest with you, in my stories, some stories I looked at and go, I don't think this is great. Then people would read it and say, hey, I really liked your story. So
Yeah.
you'll have really oddball creations, and people will go. People will like it or hate it, and but the thing is, at least put it out there and see what people think.
yeah, you've also done some other characters outside of TikTok Tom Max Mooncrater is sort of in the TikTok Tom universe.
Yeah, what happened with Max Mooncrater was Patrick Poutler and I created that years ago, and it was our homage to Buck Rogers and all the sci-fi comics of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and we had Max Mooncrater and his Mercury Man, and there was a throwback. Then we had another character called Nancy Raygun, and so we, as life went along, we kind of put it aside, and both of us got, we got married, we had kids, everything, and day jobs and everything. That got put aside. Then years later, when I was doing Temptation again, I keep bringing up our Temptation book. It's a great book, so read it. Plug. So when we were doing that storyline, there was a scene where, in the story, not to give too much away, these space whales come and space pirates come and they're off into space. And I was thinking, what else can I do here? And I thought, you know what? Time to bring Max back. So I contacted Patrick and I go, hey, Patrick, can I use Max in the storyline? Patrick was, 100% behind it. And as soon as I did it, everyone liked that character.
Yeah, yeah. So you kind of brought it into the TikTok Tom universe.
Yes. And it was just tied in. And Patrick and I have been talking about for years to, do another Max Mooncrater story. It just putting it, at this age, it's having the time to do it.
Yeah, yeah. But it's kind of neat. It's kind of neat how you sort of had something on the side and then you sort of brought it into your main universe. A lot of creators do that. I mean, you can look at somebody like Kevin Smith or some of the other movie creators too, and even the origins of comic book like DC and Marvel. All of their characters, like the Avengers, were completely different comic books in completely different worlds, and then they decided to smush them together. And of course, we know that's what created like Crisis on Infinite Earth and all that. But on the other hand, though, it created some teams like the Justice League and the Avengers, which are kind of neat team ups. So it's kind of cool that you sort of have done the same, you follow the same path and manage to find a way. And I think that's one of the good things about even mainstream comic books is when you can have ideas from different corners of your brain kind of come together in one place. It's kind of fun.
And the good thing is, like for example, like when I was drawing Maximum Creator again, and trying to write them and draw them and stuff, it's funny. It's how characters are, and I don't know how you think about when you create your characters, but when I was drawing Max and writing him, in my mind, it's like, okay, this is a completely different mindset than Tom, than Jack, than Iggy, and it works. You have your own, your characters have their own personalities.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how you do that with characters, how you build personalities into them. When really, it's funny because, the reality is it's a flat piece of paper with lines on it, and it's something you're making up in your mind. But yet you sort of, at a certain point, you almost like know how a character is going to react to a situation, not because it's in your mind, but because you just know the character that well.
And that goes back to what I was saying about Peter Milligan saying, when you create the character, they write themselves, and it's true. It's once you start designing, like one of the newer books we're working on, one of the characters that appears, same thing. It's like, when I started drawing out the character designs and I had a friend help me out, next after the first story, it's just like the character just, even when I gave our next stories split up into segments and we have different writers on it, each one of them wrote the character and understood it, and it just and it's like the character became a what do you call it, they knew what to write.
Yeah, it's, I mean, you could probably read, I think Temptation's probably, if you want to learn about the TikTok Tom characters, that's probably one of the best books to read in that respect. Like, people ask me about, when I tell them that I've done this thing called TikTok Tom, they're like, they look online and there's so much, and I often point them to Temptation as being like, this is probably where you should start. Unless you want to start from the beginning and go through everything. If you want to start in the middle, Temptation is sort of a good place to get a good idea about all the characters and about their sort of what they do in the book. Maybe not their origins necessarily, but at least their personalities are well written in there.
And not to pat myself and Tom's backs on this, but we had fun writing that story, and I think we did a great job on it, and we enjoyed it. And you're right, all the characters that appeared were individually different, and they worked. I mean, we had a lot of characters in that book.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so one of the books we worked on, it's our 600-page book. We just originally it's a 600-page book we did, and it's called Between Planets. It's take a look at our website. I'll give you, or Instagram page. I'll give you all the information. Tom Yo and I worked on this with Paul Marhue and Peter Macchioni, but Tom and I did the bulk of the story, almost 400 or 500 pages of the story. In that storyline, it has Tom, Iggy, and Jack, jumping across a different universe and fighting zombies and gorillas and all this stuff. And in one of the issues, not to give away any stories, but a new character I introduced we called her the other Iggy. And she's from an alternative version of Iggy. And when Tom and I wrote her, no joke, we loved her. We loved the way she was interacting, everything. And she was a fun character to write. And if you read the story, you'll see why. And we even did a self-contained story with her. I think it was 12 pages or something like that. And even Tom had fun writing her and drawing her. And then once the storyline was over, this storyline ended about, 5 years ago. And recently, Tom and I were talking about that character, and Tom and I were going, I was saying I want to bring her back, but even Tom said, no, her story's done. She's in that, her story was set, told. Best to leave her alone now.
Yeah, that is something. Sometimes you can overuse a character, or because you have such fond memories of writing and drawing it, it may not actually work within the storylines that you want to create. Like
That's it, and I think that's why Tom said, you know what, best to just leave it alone
That's interesting.
because, and she was a really good character, and I really want, and I like drawing her and like writing her, but again, it's one of those things. You're right, best left alone.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of characters you like and you've been drawing, why don't we talk about your latest villain, who's, I think, a lot of people are enjoying quite a bit now, a lot of the creators.
Yeah, we're working away on our new book called Maneater, and in that, TikTok Tom arch nemesis is introduced. Her name is Madam 666, and my original idea for the character, and I've had this idea for a long time. I want to use her. Never had the chance to put her down on paper. It was always in here, and so I drew up some rough sketches for her. And my original concept idea was she was based on a 1920s fashion model style woman. Hairstyle same, dressing style same, but with the Day of the Dead kind of approach, zombie Day of the Dead look to her. So I did a couple of sketches, and I needed help. So Patrick Poutler, I know who, amazing artist and creator and stuff. So I asked him for help, and I'm going, Patrick, can you help me polish this character up? So then Patrick and I sent, photos back and forth of, internet photos of, 20 styles and stuff like that. And Patrick came up with a design, and it was great.
Yeah.
And then writing the character, I did the first issue, and she was fun to write. It was easy to write. Then I gave was it later on, one of the, was it, Derek, his handles Derek the Destroyer on Instagram. He started writing that character, and he had fun with her.
Yeah.
Then same thing with Tom Yo Massimo, and said it's a great character. It's funny. It's like doing this when everyone looked at the sketches and a brief description of her, everyone just got into it and said, "Hey, this is a fun character to write."
Yeah, villains are often that way, though. Villains are sometimes the most fun characters you can do. Like, to some degree, sometimes the heroes themselves get kind of boring, and the villains become really a lot of fun.
But plus, also, I think when you look at the design of the character, I think that's what appealed to a lot of people also, because, hate to say it, it's not, she's a female character, she's wearing a 20 style, not at that time, kind of risque type of dress,
Yeah.
So, it's not much for now, but, and just the look of her, it just made her, everyone just got interested in her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even I did a sketch of her just because of her makeup just completely intrigued me and everything like that. And also, what I like about her as a villain is it's not like she's particularly big, bulky, muscular, carrying big guns. Like, she doesn't have that sort of like real villain thing. Like, she definitely looks evil, but it's not because she's like, she's not a monster per se, other than the makeup and the sort of, and obviously what she does and how she comes about is kind of monstrous. But like, she does, it's there's something weak about her, but she's not weak at the same time. Like, her power comes from something else. It's really cool.
And I think that's, again, with any character creation, I think that's the key part. It's like, make a character interesting that, I could write my own characters and draw and whatever, but when someone else is interpreting that character, make sure, with this character, it was surprising how easy everyone was, took the task of writing a story on her, because everyone just, saw a lot of potential with her.
And how many villains how many like arch nemesis has TikTok Tom had in the past? Like, I'm trying to think.
This is the first one. This is the first one, really, because Paul Marhu and I were joking about that. He made a comment saying, "It's good to see Tom have an arch villain now."
Yeah, because I was trying to think. Like, I was thinking in the past, if there have been, it's almost more like the past of TikTok Tom has been like TikTok Tom versus the Weird Universe or the Gang of Zombies.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, zombies and all.
Yeah, it's been more
actually,
like a general world.
He did have a villain in our 600-page book, which is the Gorilla.
Yep.
Gorilla Grady. Long story short, it's a gorilla who goes angry on the world and wants to kill Tom because of the storyline. Don't want to give anything away. So, and he goes, but that would be the closest arch villain Tom's had. Most of the time, you're right. It's just been background things happening. Even or going back to Temptation, the villain who was introduced in that, Marley, the space pirate, Marley and his the whalers, and space pirates, they're after Iggy and Jack.
Yeah.
Tom appears later, so it's not even a Tom villain.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of interesting that you've been doing this for so long, and only now have you got your villain, sort of your really big bad, as they call them in the sort of superhero world. And you've just sort of introduced the big bad, and I think it's going to add a lot to the story too. Like I think you're going to have it. It's an interesting twist, but it's also interesting that you've been able to go so long, because the main characters are so strong that just watching your main characters go on like adventures has been enough, an interesting enough story up until this point that those characters are interesting enough. So now you've added another interesting character. I think it's going to get really. I see great things in the future of this for TikTok Tom.
Well, thank you, and that's what I see. It's like, for example, even Molitor. Molitor, technically, Iggy's going to a coffee shop, gets the middle finger from Molitor in line and stuff like that. So Tom's not even around in that storyline.
Yeah.
So Molitor's not even a Tom villain. It's an Iggy villain.
Yeah.
And so, and you're right. It's like, and I think what the book was, I think and this is where the randomness come in, where we're just doing short stories here, short stories there. This is our first, no, not first, but even when Tom Yo and I did that 600-page book, we didn't even think about having a major villain and stuff like that in there. We introduced a couple of characters in Hell. Tom and the gang go to Hell. Technically, we're not really villains.
No, it's more like, again, I always thought of TikTok Tom as being like a interdimensional adventure rather than a fight against a bad guy.
Yeah. And even the bad guys that do approach, eventually they're not, they're out to completely destroy them or kill them or, take over the world type of, villains. They're more like quirky, hey, you stole this from me. You took this from me, and that's it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how Madame 666, yes. How she'll, keeping her going is going to be an interesting challenge, I find, with villains and with even main characters, is trying to find a way to make the confrontation work.
She's working out very well. I have about 60 pages done on the story, and trust me, it's going to be a really good storyline.
Cool. When should people look out for that?
Coming out early next year.
Cool.
Okay, so Chris, tell me about your characters. I know you have a new character you haven't introduced so far. Evil teacher of sorts, or master.
Yeah. So basically, Blue Orchid Blue Orchid started with literally just Blue Orchid and a character that I thought it'd be an interesting contrast to have a character that, like a youngish girl fighting giant monsters. So it's just the contrast between giant monsters and young girl, I thought would be kind of fun to tell. So when I originally came up with the original stories, literally that was all I had in mind. I had no sort of overarching story, but then I realized I had to add more to it. So the first characters I introduced were her family. So she has a younger brother and her mother, because this is when I started to think about, like, I wanted to have an origin for her, and so I figured that her powers come from her family. So her father had the powers before her grandfather before her, and her great grandfather had it before her, and then her mother sort of, when an orchid, when they call themselves orchids, so there's different orchids. She's the blue orchid. There's a yellow orchid, a green orchid, and a red orchid. That's her grandfather, great grandfather, and father were all different orchids. When they die, the next orchid has to take over, and her brother was too young to be an orchid when her father died, and so that's why she took it on. So she's the first female, and so I figured having the mother there still, the father died, so the mother there is sort of the only coach she has, and she was never supposed to be the orchid. It was supposed to be her brother, and her brother's sort of oblivious, knows she's the orchid, but is oblivious to the sort of, like, that she's working really hard and fighting all these monsters, doesn't really realize the difficult part of it. So I had those characters introduced, and then the character that I'm working on right now, the additional character, is the big bad, because I realized at a certain point that I would have to like have a reason for the monsters to exist. And
Now,
you know,
now going backwards for a second, what made you set the character in a village in is it Thailand she's in, or
it's no particular Southeast Asian country. Like it's just
okay,
I just sort of I keep it vague just because there's plenty of Southeast Asian countries, and so if anybody who's reading it can see a bit of their own country in it, then that's
that's
good.
it.
So I keep it vague, but it's Southeast Asia. I mean, the main reason I did it is because I came up with the character, and I was living in Phnom Penh in Cambodia, and it was just the reference I had around me. So I would travel to the small villages and see these cool wooden houses on stilts and everything like that. And also the idea of orchids are sort of important in Southeast Asian culture. So when I sort of came up with this idea of this young girl fighting, came up with the name Orchid, it was all about sort of my surroundings. And I'm still living in Southeast Asia.
No, but which is great. No, which is great because that's what I really liked, because the setting, in your first two books, you don't see any Western culture references in there, which is perfect. I mean, it works, and if you live in in Asia, it works perfectly. You have the open the door, and you have all the references you want.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the things. And I mean, I'm not going to get back to your characters too much, but we can also say the same about TikTok Tom characters. I mean, geez, the Geek Shop, if that's not Silver Snail on Queen Street,
yeah,
I don't know what is, to the point where the box is just, isn't that where the original Sugar Mountain, the alleyway where Sugar Mountain used to be? So it's like, and the coffee shops, I mean, you guys were going to coffee shops all the time.
Oh yeah, all the time, yeah.
And so it becomes part of it. So I think that's an important part about writing a comic book and creating characters, because that's the other thing too, that I like why I did a young female character, is because in Southeast Asia there's a sort of, there's a bit of an empowerment movement towards girls in Asia, and I see that everywhere around me. And so to me, is like writing that character it almost sounds like it's lazy, but it's easy, because there's just so much reference.
Works. It works, and way you wrote her, she works very well, and it works. And great character development. I mean, in the first two issues, you can tell. I mean, she, you know the character, you like her, and you see why she's fighting. And it's great character development.
Yeah, and hopefully issue 3, which I'm drawing right now. Hopefully you get to actually. That's when I'm introducing the big bad villain, who's
okay. Now let's talk about him. Yeah.
So the basic concept around him was that I figured she's always fighting monsters, but there has to sort of be like a reason for it, or she gets tired, and it seems never ending to her. Like there's always another monster to fight. So I sort of came up with, there's actually two characters. One's the big bad villain, which is the this sort of old man who is, it's a little, if I was to compare him to some characters, it's sort of like I guess who would I sort of a Thanos character who wants to sort of destroy the world, but destroy the world because the world's been destroying itself.
But see, when you showed me the sketches of the character, he reminds me of Mr. Miyagi.
Exactly. Well, that's definitely the thing. I want him, because part of the thing about like Karate Kid and everything, though, was that Mr. Miyagi appeared to be weak, but he was in fact like
he wasn't. Yeah, and that's what. Yeah.
And so this character is the same sort of thing. He's sort of creating these monsters. He appears sort of weak and helpless, but in fact he's like the main thing creating these things. And I already have sort of the 4th issue in mind. It's going to be an interesting showdown between this sort of weak character and Blue Orchid. But the other thing in issue 3, I don't know if I've ever shown you a sketch for it. Actually, I might even have one here. I pulled out a few sketches. So I have, this is the mayor of the city.
You didn't show me. Yeah.
So he's the mayor of the city where she always fights monsters. And part of the idea of that is he's not really a bad guy, but he sort of like uses her. Like he's like, he's like, well, of course we keep our city safe, because he sort of takes credit for all the battling she does, and pretends to sort of be his friend, but really isn't. He's just trying to do it to stay mayor. So,
see, again, that's a great great character development on the mayor.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like it's sort of a friend, but sort of not, mostly not,
Yeah.
and sort of ropes her in and takes advantage of her. But you know, I sort of introduced both of these characters in issue 3, and hopefully, I know the big bad will get in it, but I think the mayor will end up making future appearances as well.
Now here's a
So,
question for you on your character for the main character. How much character development did you do? Like,
like for
what was your
Blue
process?
Orchid,
Yeah.
I mean, Blue Orchid, a lot of as far as actual look of the character. Um, there was a lot. It was a couple of years. Like I had done my first sketch of Blue Orchid like several years before I started the comic book, and I just didn't know how to get like the personality didn't follow. Like I always wanted to do, like I said, a young sort of preteen or teen Southeast Asian girl, but I didn't want her to be super powerful looking, and I didn't want her to be I didn't want to my Allison, my wife, always loves the fact that Blue Orchid, she isn't over sexualized by any stretch. There isn't
That's
sort of
it.
this and so
And
I
that's
wanted to make sure that was it in the design.
and that's one thing Tom, you and I talked about. And this is the bad running joke for comics. You have a female character, we have a female character, and you know, they're skinny, and we're skinny, average-looking people. You know, most comic fans. I mean, most comic creators. Not to insult anyone, but most of them would create a big-breasted woman with breast showing. And muscular. Kind of like a
Yep.
Supergirl type of a figure or a She-Hulk type of a figure, and it's like, you know what? No, we went with the traditional average look, and it works because you know what? That's who we are.
And the other thing about it, I find, and again, this is writer laziness, is they've written a million comics. Like I have nothing against sort of the ultra sexy, scantily clad. Like I have nothing against it. Not always my cup of tea, but there's a few characters that are like that I actually really enjoy. And the fact that they're scantily clad is sometimes an interesting part of the story, and they make fun of it. Like I remember Gen 13. This, the early thing, they at one point they get their superpowers and they get like super like sexualized, and they make fun of it. Like they kind of make fun of it in the first few issues of it, and they're like, oh my god, we're like these horrible tropes. And so I don't mind that in a character, but the reason why I didn't do that is because there's been so few stories told about sort of the scrawny teenage girl
That's
that
it, and
it's easy. There's so many stories to tell. Like it's easy to tell. It's the same with Iggy. There's so many stories to tell because there's so few stories in existence of a character like her.
yeah. And for us, even what we were talking about earlier was creating Madam 666. Tom Yo and I joked going, if we wanted to sell more copies, we would make her a costume like Vampirella. you
Yeah.
know, but we went with hiding the breast, not showing it.
That, and it makes the character more interesting. Like it suits her personality more, and that
Yeah.
personality hasn't been written about a million times. So you have so many story options where you're not just copying somebody else's story arc. So it's
Well,
kind of good.
same thing with your book, Blue Orchid. Looking at that, the character's costume, even that, it's traditional Asian, like garb. And
Yep.
but the thing is, you could have gone the opposite direction and have her in like a bikini type of a, in a bikini type of a costume, and have her fighting big rock monsters, and
Yeah.
do it that way. But no, you went what your look. It's great. When I drew her, I think I drew her twice, and it was fun.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. I find, like personally, and again, I know lots of people that like to do like the super anatomy stuff, and I think we talked about this in a past episode of this where you were talking about, you submitted, I think, what was it, to Marvel or something like that, and they said, you don't have these anatomy things, but your storytelling is really great.
That's it.
And
Yes.
to some degree, I almost feel the same way, where my anatomy isn't as strong, and so I like I don't want that tight costume because I'm not about sitting there and chiseling every muscle. Like I like the idea of sort of a floppy, ill-fitting costume, and it lets me play because I like drawing. I really like drawing liquid, and I really like drawing fabrics, and so her
Yeah.
costume is just what I like to draw. So But yeah, I mean, character-wise, the only thing about Blue Orchid, I mean, I've got 4 issues sort of basically written for her. I don't know how many more I'm going to have after that, but we'll see. You know, I don't know if they have the longevity of your TikTok Tom characters, but
Now, do you
we'll see.
find it with your character after the first issue? Did you find it easier to write her? Like she, like the storyline and how her personality is going to react, how she's going to react to certain situation, even arguing with her mom or her brother or something. You kind of was it by now with issue 3. Do you find it now you know that character?
Pretty much, like I know how she's going to react to things and everything like that. So yeah, and I mean, and drawing her 100, like I almost feel like I'm drawing her more poorly and more poorly because I feel like it's getting easier and easier. So I almost feel like I'm cutting corners. But then I look at it and I'm like, actually, I'm drawing her better than I did in the first issue. So, maybe it's not that, but yeah, you're probably right. Like I probably haven't thought about it, but story-wise, like even when I'm doing a facial expression, like right now in issue 3, the big bad is explaining sort of why he's doing bad things. And her facial expressions are really easy for me to draw right now. And I know which ones to use. Like, I know how she's going to react to the different things that this villain is telling her. As opposed to, I think early on, I probably would have overthought it. And I would have had to have overthink it because I didn't know. But at this point, I think I know how she reacts just out of instinct.
Now, question for you: with Blue Orchid or any of the side characters, how much of your personality is in that character?
You see,
Or your wife's personality,
Yeah, you know what? I think I mean, I think there's no way of getting around it. There's always some of your own character in something. Like Blue Orchid sort of represents when I'm being tough, but I'm not. Like I'm actually, sort of a wimp in real life. But sometimes if I stand up for myself, I feel like Blue Orchid, because she feels a bit like a phony in that regard. I mean, she has the powers and everything, but she sort of doesn't feel like a superhero necessarily. But I think more the characters represent how I see some people that I see around me. So I write characters based on people around me, like any of the writing I've ever done. Like I did a novel which hasn't been published yet, which may be published at some point, but I sort of take the personalities of the people around me and write them as characters as opposed to writing myself into it. So
No, that's
I don't know if that
good.
makes sense.
Okay. No, it does. It does. No,
So,
because
yeah,
every time you create a character, you're putting a little bit of your personality in there somewhere.
Yeah, but I think more so I tend to put the personality I observe of other people into it.
Yes.
So I write it almost like I'm the narrator looking at my friends and what would my friends, and so Blue Orchid is sort of based off of friends I've had in Southeast Asia, really tough. In fact, there was one friend that I made recently, and she's sort of changed the way Blue Orchid works a little bit. I won't out her, but she's a very athletic person and can do like all the moves that Blue Orchid does, obviously except for the flying. So very sort of athletic and like martial arts and everything like that. And so I remember meeting her and being like, oh my God, this is like the physical version of Blue Orchid. And so I sort of almost stepped back, and now when Blue Orchid's doing moves, I sort of think of her and think, okay, this is how she's going to do them. This is how she would do them. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, Tom, you and I recently were talking about a comic book he read, and he was talking about the characterization and all that stuff. And it's interesting, even certain writers and stuff like that, when they come on certain books, as the issues go along, you could tell that the writer's getting into that character, because you could see from the first issue to, let's say, by issue 10, the character's completely changed, and you could tell how the writers react, now absorbing all that information and writing that character.
The good thing is people change, so it doesn't seem that weird. It's not like if you write a character and they're different after like 4 or 5 issues of a comic book, that it's something wrong, like you've done something wrong. Because I always sort of attribute it, like, you look at early Wolverine compared to current Wolverine in comic books, like they're totally different characters, but you can accept that because you can also accept the idea that, this character of Logan has like learned more about their past and things have happened to them, so they've changed as a character. So that's one of the great things about character development, is you're allowed to change them, because then you can just attribute that change to not only you changing the character and learning more about it, but also the character learning about their environment, about their past and everything. Like Blue Orchid is introduced to her nemesis for the first time in issue 3. And so she can change after that. She's allowed to, because now she has a different perspective about all these monsters.
That's it. Yeah, and then how she reacts to the villain, and what his intentions are. She might go completely psycho and go, "Hey, I want to kill you," attitude, or let's work this out, or I want to save the world type of attitude. So there's a lot of ways you could turn that character around, and which direction do you go? It reminds me of going back to the 80s. Was it 80s or 90s? When Hal Jordan snapped and turned evil. Same type of thing, depending on the situation and what was around that character to make him snap. And that's a controversial storyline how it happened, but I thought it was a great move for the character because you could see someone snapping like that.
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of interesting things, and I mean, you can even that's a common thing in characters. Like you can look at Captain America's Hail Hydra moments recently. Even Superman has had a few moments, where he snapped, be it because of a reason or be it just because he's frustrated. Like, so it's a good thing to have in a character, and it's a good, again, characters evolve, and it's a good thing. If not, stories get boring if characters don't evolve. So it's important.
Now, let me ask you this: reading comics, and I know your background animation and stuff. Any certain books or animation where you see that had good characterizations that you followed and said, "Hey, wow, this is a great character development"?
I really, and I know Image comics are the thing, but I really like the Max in Image, and I felt like that character changed drastically by the end of the series, just insanely. And so that's one that I've always, I still read that series all the way through just to watch the character development and everything like that. So that's kind of one, at least, trying to think. I mean, I look at comics that don't change, like Gru. And that character has never changed ever, which is kind of cool. I think that.
But the character never changed, but it has good, supporting characters, everything. It's good, what do you call it, cast. And like you said earlier about, referencing Friends and other TV shows, Gru is a good example of good characterizations that each character had their own different personality and it mixed in very well with the story. Gru's never going to change. I mean, it's Gru's Gru. It's never going to change. Okay, so this is, again, this is a great conversation on character development. And what I find for character development is looking at a lot of comics and, books, TV shows and stuff like that. And just look, a good book, any good story, well, as long as the characters develop well, you won't care about the plot lines or anything. You're more interested in the characters.
Yeah.
So my advice to anyone creating characters is, just draw the character out, keep drawing, writing them, and they'll write themselves.
Yeah, for sure. There's a few good reference books. There's actually one animation book I think it's called Villains, and it was by.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
It's a Disney book, and it really gets into like developing your villains, because that's one thing that a lot of people forget about with comic books often. Is I know that you're talking about your first villain, sort of your first arch nemesis, but you've always sort of had villains in it, so I don't think you've ever had that problem. But a lot of sort of first-time comic creators I've talked to, and even Blue Orchid was guilty of that at first, where it was a comic book I just had the hero in mind and didn't have the villains. I didn't even have the monsters when I first sort of developed her. It was just a cool Southeast Asian hero, and I was trying to figure out who she was going to fight. And then the monsters just came to me because I like to draw monsters. But I think it's really important for people to look at developing their villains well and think about their villains really well when you're doing it, be it whether it's for one issue or be it like a sort of arch nemesis that goes several issues. It's always important to come up with a good villain and make sure that that villain will work, or else the story is really not there. You can have a great, strong leading character, but you got to have that the villain as well.
But instead, also the villain, but also have main characters also and supporting characters where, where you have a universe of characters that basically write themselves, and you could tell stories long stories of him, like we said earlier in the video. You know, my books, a lot of times, if you look at them, Tom's the secondary character.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I can definitely see that. You know, I mean, as you were saying earlier, it's like you have full stories where you'll be 20 pages in going, oh yeah, there's that Tom guy, you know, the guy whose name is on the cover. We got to remember that. So
Yeah, so, best advice I give people is, you know what? Just create a character, keep sketching, drawing them out.
Yeah.
And you know what? You'll go through dozens of sketches, and eventually you'll come to a point where say, hey, this works. And as you're drawing them, you'll create personalities.
yeah, the other thing I suggest to people too is draw your characters doing things. So a lot of people sort of draw their characters in these hero stances, but it's sort of like draw your characters, like when you're developing characters, have them doing things. Like think about what they would do in a story, or like when I'm designing a character, it's not just about like I don't tend to just draw the front, side, left, right, model sheet, animation model sheet style thing. I also the other day I was doodling Blue Orchid ordering coffee at a coffee shop, because I was sitting in a coffee shop, I was watching people order, and I was like, oh, well, how would Blue Orchid, handle this? And so that's one thing.
So you brought up So you brought up a good point on that. Best example I'm going to give you is look at the legend Tom Yo's pages. Look at his Instagram pages. All of the characters he draws, they're not in standard poses. They're either drinking a coffee, eating an ice cream, or eating a licorice or something like that.
Exactly. It's like if you have your characters doing stuff, your stories are going to be easier to tell because you're developing the personality traits. And even if they're doing stupid things, like stupid mundane things, I actually did a whole series, I think it was last year or the year before, of superheroes doing mundane things. So I have like the Flash mowing a lawn, the Max watching TV, I think Hulk knitting. And so I would just do again, characters doing basic things. And then I realized that when you're developing a character, it's the same sort of thing. Rather than just having them standing there in your sort of development doodles, have them do something. Because you never know when you never know when something might happen. Like Blue Orchid might order a coffee. Like it might be an interesting thing for her to be doing that. And I'll already have the reference for it.
Yeah.
So I think that's good. I think we can wrap up this episode. So thanks for everybody for watching. Do you have any last words, Chetan?
No, just have fun creating characters. That's all I could say. Keep creating. Keep making comics.